The fire crackled softly in the quiet night. A single man sat by the flames, staring at the small pot where his evening meal cooked. He had been alone for weeks on this strange planet, surviving on whatever scraps he could find. Every sound in the dark made him alert, because out here, he could trust nothing. The wilderness was silent, yet it felt alive, as if something was always watching. The man stirred his meal slowly, his tired eyes half closed. For a moment, he thought maybe tonight would be peaceful, but then, his instincts warned him. Something was wrong. A shadow moved near the edge of the firelight. It was small, fast, and trying very hard not to be seen. The man's hand went to his weapon instantly. He stood up, scanning the darkness. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice hard. The shadow froze, then crept closer. Finally, it stepped into the light. It was not a man, not even close. It was a child, but not human. Her skin was pale and faintly glowing, her large eyes shining like glass. Her body was thin, her arms trembling. She looked more fragile than dangerous. The man narrowed his eyes, keeping his weapon steady. The child was crouching near the pot of food. She stretched out a shaking hand as if to grab it. The man shouted again, and she pulled back instantly, fear flashing across her face. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of running away, the alien child looked at him with wide, tearful eyes. No sound came from her mouth, only a weak whimper. Her stomach growled so loudly that even the man heard it over the fire. She was starving, desperate, and she had tried to steal his only meal. For a long moment, the two stared at each other. The man's weapon remained raised. The child's small body shook, her eyes pleading silently. The man felt torn. On one side, he needed the food to survive. On the other, he saw not a thief, but a child about tea. The man knew this was only the beginning. Something about her felt different. Something told him that her past carried more pain than he could imagine, and now, their paths were tied together. Whether he liked it or not, the night passed slowly. The man did not sleep much. His eyes kept drifting toward the alien child curled up by the fire. Her breathing was uneven, her body trembling as if even in sleep she was afraid. He told himself he should send her away in the morning. She was not his problem, but deep inside, something in her weak figure kept him from doing it. When dawn broke, the man stirred the fire back to life. The smell of fresh broth rose from the pot. It was all he had left from his hunt yesterday. As he moved, he felt her eyes on him. The child had woken, sitting silently, staring at the food with a hunger that almost hurt to watch. Her stomach growled again, louder this time. She pressed her thin hands against it, trying to stop the sound. The man sighed, half annoyed, half concerned. He scooped a small portion into a metal cup and placed it in front of her. She did not grab it immediately. Instead, she looked at him carefully, like a creature who had learned not to trust too easily. Finally, when he nodded, she moved. She took the cup and ate quickly, spilling broth down her chin, her large eyes filled with relief, almost like tears. The man shook his head slowly. Whoever she was, she had been starving for far too long. This was not just hunger, it was survival. As she ate, he studied her closer. Her skin was pale, glowing faintly under the rising sun. Her arms were covered in scars, not from wild animals but from something deliberate, burns, cuts, bruises that told a story without words. She must have suffered greatly. The thought made his chest tighten. When the food was gone, she licked the cup clean, then hugged it to her chest as if afraid it would be taken away. The man crouched beside her, his voice low. "You don't have to steal anymore," he said softly. Of course, she could not understand, but something in his tone made her eyes soften. For a brief second, she looked less like a thief and more like a lost child desperate for safety. Then, suddenly, she tensed. Her eyes darted toward the trees, her small body shaking violently. She let out a soft whimper, almost a cry. The man followed her gaze, hand going to his weapon, but he saw nothing. Only the empty forest, silent and still. The child pressed herself against the ground, hiding her face. She was terrified of something unseen. The man's jaw tightened. This was not ordinary fear. This was the kind of fear that lived inside someone who had seen monsters, real ones, and maybe they were not only monsters of the forest, maybe they were something worse. He crouched down and touched her shoulder gently. She flinched hard but did not run. Her wide eyes met his again, full of terror. He whispered, "No one's here," though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. Her chest rose and fell fast, her breathing ragged, but slowly. She calmed, still trembling but staying close to the firelight. The man decided he had to know more. he picked up a stick and drew a simple circle in the dirt, then tapped his chest. "Me," he said. The child tilted her head, watching, then she took the stick with shaking hands and drew strange symbols. Lines that twisted into shapes he did not recognize. Her hands shook as she drew, and tears welled in her eyes. Whatever she was trying to explain, it was painful. The man stared at the symbols, but they meant nothing to him. Still, he understood one thing. She was trying, she wanted him to know. Even if the words were impossible, he nodded slowly, pointing at the sky above. Her body stiffened instantly, her lips pressing tight as if to stop herself from crying out. She shook her head violently, then hugged her knees. The man watched, his suspicion growing. Something terrible had happened up there. And somehow, this small child had fallen into his world, carrying nothing but scars and fear. The thought chilled him. Maybe she was running from something still hunting her. Maybe he was now caught in the same danger. The day stretched on. The man shared more food with her, though it meant less for himself. Each time she ate, he saw a little more life return to her face. But she never smiled. Her eyes always carried the weight of shadows, as if happiness was something long lost to her. That night, when darkness covered the land again, the child did not sleep far away like before. This time she curled up closer to the fire, closer to him. Her small frame trembled, but her eyes closed more peacefully. The man sat awake, weapon across his lap. He stared at her, wondering what kind of life had forced a child to survive this way. He thought he had seen enough pain in his own life. But now, he realized, hers was far worse, and for the first time, he felt something strange. Not just pity, not just curiosity, but a rising determination. Whoever had hurt her, whatever had broken her spirit, he would not let it reach her again. The fire burned low, the night heavy and silent, yet in that silence, a bond had begun, fragile, uncertain, but real. The man knew one thing with certainty. This was no ordinary encounter. This was the start of something that would change them both forever. The next morning rose with a cold wind. The man woke before the alien child, stirring the fire back to life. He watched her small figure curled tightly, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked so fragile, as if a strong breeze might break her. For a moment, he wondered how she had even survived this long. When the smell of food drifted into the air, the child's eyes slowly opened. She sat up quickly, alert, like a wild animal ready to run. But when she saw him, her body loosened just a little. She remembered the food, the warmth, the fire, and though her fear remained, there was also something new in her gaze, caution mixed with hope. The man gave her a small portion, and again she ate quickly. This time, though, she stopped halfway. Her large eyes lifted to him, and for the first time, she pushed a piece of food toward him. It was clumsy, small, yet it made him pause. She was trying to share, even though she had so little. He accepted it with a nod, and she lowered her head, almost shy. After they ate, the man decided to try again. He took a stick and drew a circle in the dirt, tapping his chest. "Human," he said firmly. The child tilted her head, then touched the circle gently. She made a strange sound, soft but clear. It was not his word, but he knew it was hers, her word for him. He smiled faintly and drew another circle, pointing at her. The child hesitated, then tapped her chest. She whispered a sound, broken and trembling. It was her name, strange, musical, unlike any human word. The man repeated it clumsily, and for the first time, the child let out a small sound that almost seemed like laughter. It was weak, fragile, but real. That tiny moment changed everything. For the first time, she looked less like a stranger and more like someone reaching out for connection. The man tried more words, pointing at things, the fire, the cup, the sky. She listened carefully, repeating in her broken voice. Sometimes she shook her head, correcting him in her own tongue. It was slow, awkward, but every attempt drew them closer. Later, while exploring the edge of the forest, the man noticed the child limping slightly. He stopped her and knelt down, gently pulling her leg closer. She resisted at first, but then let him see. Beneath the torn fabric was an old wound, bruised and poorly healed. The sight filled him with quiet anger. Someone had hurt her and left her to suffer. He wrapped the wound with what little cloth he had, working slowly. The child's eyes stayed locked on his face the whole time. When he finished, she whispered something soft, a word he could not understand, but the look in her eyes told him enough. She was thanking him. That night, as the fire crackled, the child picked up a stick of her own. She bent over the dirt, drawing symbols again. This time, they were clearer, strange lines and shapes that seemed to form a picture. At first, the man did not understand, but then he saw it, the outline of ships, large and sharp, figures running, smaller figures falling. Her hand shook as she drew, tears dripping onto the dirt. The story was clear even without words. She had fled from something terrible, her people had been attacked, and she had been left alone in the aftermath. The man clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He could not erase her past, but he could choose what happened next. For the first time in many years, he felt a purpose stronger than survival. This child needed him, not as a guard, not as a stranger, but as someone willing to fight for her. When she finished drawing, she curled against the fire, her body weak with exhaustion. The man sat beside her, watching the stars above. He wondered what kind of monsters could do this to a child, and if they were still out there, searching. The thought sent a chill down his spine, but then he looked at her again, and a strange warmth rose in his chest. Whatever danger was coming, he would not let it touch her. Before sleep claimed him, he heard her small voice again. She whispered his name, not his real one, but the broken version she had given him. It was soft, almost gentle, and in that moment, he knew, a connection had been made, fragile but unbreakable. They were no longer just a man and an alien child, they were something more. A bond had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The night was heavy with silence. The fire burned low, sending weak light across the camp. The man tried to rest, but his eyes opened again and again. Something about the alien child's sleep unsettled him. Her small body curled tightly, her face buried in her arms, but even in sleep, she trembled. Then it began. She whimpered softly, her lips moving as if she was speaking to someone unseen. Her voice grew louder, broken sounds spilling from her mouth. Suddenly, she jerked upright with a sharp cry, her glowing eyes wide with terror, her chest heaving like she had been running for her life. The man rushed to her side, his hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said, though she could not understand, but she flinched hard, pressing back against the ground. Her eyes darted around wildly as if searching for shadows that only she could see. The man lowered his voice, steady and calm. "You're safe," he whispered, slowly. Her breathing eased, but tears streamed down her cheeks. The child clung to him suddenly, her thin arms wrapping around his side. The man froze, stunned by the sudden closeness, but then he placed a hand gently on her back. She was shaking uncontrollably, her small body carrying fear too big for her age. He realized then, this was not just a nightmare, this was memory. The next day, the child was quiet. She followed him closely, her eyes never leaving the trees around them. Every sound made her jump, every shadow made her tense. The man noticed scars on her arms he hadn't seen before, some shaped like burns, others like sharp cuts. None of them looked natural, they were marks of cruelty, and the thought filled him with anger. At noon, while resting, she picked up a stick again. This time, she didn't draw ships or symbols, she drew figures, tall and sharp, with glowing eyes and long weapons. She stabbed the stick into the dirt over and over, her small face twisted in fear. The man watched, his stomach tight. She was showing him the ones who had hurt her, whoever they were. They were no ordinary enemies. Then she drew smaller figures, children like her, lying still in the dirt. Her hands shook, and her breathing grew ragged. The man reached forward, stopping her before she broke the ground completely. She looked at him, her eyes glassy with tears. For a moment, the silence between them felt heavier than words. He nodded slowly, pressing a hand to his chest, as if promising no more. That night, the nightmares returned, but this time, the man stayed close. When she cried out, he was already there, his voice steady, and though she still shook, she reached for him faster, as if part of her believed he could protect her from the shadows in her mind. The days that followed were different. The bond between them grew stronger. Even in silence, she began to copy his actions. When he gathered wood, she carried small sticks. When he checked the traps, she followed and pointed excitedly at the catch. Her face never fully smiled, but her eyes lit up in rare moments. The man felt something shift inside him. For years, survival had been about himself alone, but now, every choice he made felt tied to her safety. One evening, as the fire burned brighter, she surprised him. She placed a hand over his weapon, shaking her head. Then she pointed at the sky with trembling fingers. Her lips moved, forming broken words in her language. Her voice cracked, filled with fear. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the message. the hunters were still out there, searching, and if they found her, they would not stop. The man clenched his jaw, staring into the flames. He had thought he was only sheltering a lost child, but now, he realized she was running from something much bigger, something dangerous, and by protecting her, he was putting himself in their path. But as he looked at her, this fragile, broken soul who still found strength to keep going, he knew the choice was already made. He could not turn away. Whatever hunted her would have to go through him first. That night, as the stars shone cold up, Ove, the child whispered his broken name again before falling asleep. It was a sound that carried trust, fragile but real. The man sat awake, weapon across his lap, eyes on the dark forest. Her nightmares were not just shadows of the past, they were warnings of the future, and soon, those shadows would come to life. The wind carried a strange sound that evening. It was faint, almost like a distant hum. The man froze where he stood, his hand tightening around his weapon. The alien child felt it too, her body stiffening instantly. Her wide eyes darted toward the sky, fear shining in them. For days, he had noticed her tension whenever she looked upward. Now he understood why. High above, faint lights flickered through the clouds, unnatural, sharp, moving in patterns no storm ever made. Ships, the hunters. The child clutched his arm, her thin fingers digging into his sleeve. She whispered broken words in her tongue, her voice trembling. He could not understand the meaning, but her fear told him enough. They were searching, and if they found her, she would not live to see another sunrise. The man stared at the sky, his jaw tightening. This was not his fight. He could leave her, disappear into the wilderness, and save himself. But when he looked at her, her fragile frame, her scars, her desperate eyes, he knew he could not. She was no longer a stranger, she was his responsibility. That night, as the fire burned low, the man made his decision. He would protect her, no matter the cost, even if it meant standing against forces far stronger than him. The next morning, he began to teach her. He showed her simple words, pointing at the fire, the trees, the sky. She repeated them slowly, her voice broken but determined. He taught her how to signal danger, 2 taps on the ground, how to stay silent when needed, how to run when he said so. She listened with wide eyes, nodding fear. Ely, for the first time, she was not only surviving, she was learning to fight in her own way. Days passed, they moved from camp to camp, never staying too long. The man hunted and shared every bite with her. Sometimes she tried to give him more than her share. It made him smile, though he always pushed it back to her. She needed it more. One afternoon, while searching near the river, they found tracks, not animal, boots, heavy, too organized to be anything but soldiers. The man crouched low, his eyes scanning the ground. The child's breathing quickened, her body trembling. She tugged at his sleeve, pointing frantically at the tracks. Her fear said everything. These were the ones who had hurt her people. The man's chest tightened with anger. The hunters were close, closer than he had hoped. That night, while she slept near the fire, he sat awake, staring into the flames. The choice weighed heavy on him. He could run, disappear into the far side of the wilderness, but he looked at her, sleeping peacefully for once, her small hand clutching the edge of his coat, and he knew there was no choice. He would not abandon her, not now, not ever. The next day, he prepared. He checked his traps, sharpened his knife, counted his bullets. Not enough, but it didn't matter. He had survived worse odds before. Now, he had something worth surviving for. As they walked together, the child stayed closer than ever. Her eyes no longer only held fear, there was something else there now. Trust. She began to copy his steps, moving quietly when he moved quietly, stopping when he froze. It made him proud. She was learning to survive beside him, not just behind him. At dusk, they found a small cave for shelter. As the fire crackled inside, the child drew in the dirt again. This time she drew him, tall, holding his weapon, standing beside her. Her small fingers traced the figures slowly, almost tenderly. When she finished, she looked up at him, her glowing eyes soft. She whispered his broken name again, this time stronger. The man's chest tightened. She saw him not just as a protector, but as family. He placed a hand over his heart, then gently over hers. 2 lives, bound together by survival. No words were needed. The promise was clear. He would stand with her against whatever came. Outside, the distant hum of ships grew louder. The night sky glowed faintly with searching lights. Danger was closing in, but the man no longer felt alone. For the first time, he had a purpose greater than survival. He would fight not just for himself, but for her. And if the Hunters wanted her, they would have to go through him first. The forest was too quiet, the man knew silence could be more dangerous than noise. Birds had vanished, small creatures hid deep in their holes, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He gripped his weapon tightly. Scanning the trees, the alien child stayed close to his side, her glowing eyes wide. She sensed it too. Danger was near. Then he heard it, a faint metallic hum, growing louder. Shadows moved between the trees, sharp and steady, not wild animals, hunters. The child froze, her body trembling, her hand clutched his sleeve as if letting go would mean death. The man knelt low, whispering though she could not understand the words, "Stay behind me." His tone was calm, but his heart raced. This was no longer running, this was a fight. The first figure stepped into view, tall, armored, carrying a weapon that glowed faintly in the dark. Its mask reflected the firelight from their camp. Behind it, more figures appeared, spreading out like predators circling prey. The child let out a soft cry, her lips trembling with broken words. Her nightmares had come alive. The man raised his weapon. A shot rang through the forest. The first hunter staggered back, sparks flying from its armor. The others advanced quickly, their weapons firing beams of light that scorched the trees. The man dove, pulling the child with him. The ground shook with the impact of energy blasts. "Run," he shouted, pushing her toward the shadows. She hesitated, fear pinning her in place. But when he shouted again, she obeyed, darting into the undergrowth. The man rolled behind a fallen log, firing back. Every shot was precise, every movement sharp, but there were too many. A blast scorched the ground near him, heat searing his arm. He bit back the pain and kept shooting. One hunter fell, another staggered, but still they came, cold, relentless, machines of war. Through the chaos, he glimpsed the child hiding behind a tree, her eyes locked on him, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to run to him, but fear chained her. The man shouted again, his voice raw, "Stay back." He could not let her get caught. The hunters pressed closer. He fought with everything he had, but his weapon clicked empty. No more bullets. He drew his knife, teeth clenched. This would be close. He charged, slashing at the nearest figure, sparks flying as the blade scraped armor. The hunter struck back, throwing him hard against a tree. Pain shot through his ribs, but he forced himself to stand again. The child screamed, her small voice cut through the night like lightning. Something inside her broke or awakened. Her glowing eyes blazed brighter, her body trembling with a strange energy. The ground beneath her seemed to hum, and then it happened. A pulse of light erupted from her. It spread outward in a wave, slamming into the hunters. They staggered, their weapons flickering. The man stared in shock. She had power, hidden, raw, uncontrollable. She fell to her knees, gasping, as if the burst had drained her. But in that moment, the hunters hesitated, and the man struck again. He fought with fury, knife flashing, using every breath of strength. One fell, another stumbled back, the rest regrouped, their movements slower, disrupted by the child's strange force. The man rushed to her side, pulling her close. Her small body shook violently, but her eyes burned with determination. She looked at him as if begging him not to give up. He gripped his knife tighter, standing tall before her. No matter what, he would be the wall between her and death. The hunters advanced again, slower but unbroken. The man braced for the end. His body was tired, his wounds deep, but he did not care. If he fell, he would fall protecting her. Then, far above, a new sound filled the air, a different hum, louder, heavier. The hunters froze, their masks turning skyward. Lights cut through the clouds. A massive shadow moved across the treetops. Another ship, but not theirs. The man did not know if it was friend or foe, but he knew one thing. The fight was not over, it had only begun. He held the child close, whispering though she could not understand, "We're not done yet." Her small hand gripped his tightly, her glowing eyes fierce through the tears. Together, they faced the storm, two fragile lives standing against an army. And in that moment, the hunters paused, as if realizing this human was not like the others. This one would not break. The forest still echoed with silence after the battle. Smoke rose from broken trees, the ground scorched where blasts had burned through the earth. The hunters lay scattered, their armor cracked, their weapons sparking in the dirt. The man stood among the wreckage, his knife dripping with black fluid that was not blood. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, his body weak, his wounds deep. Beside him, the alien child knelt on the ground, her small frame trembling, her glowing eyes dimmed as if the strange power inside her had drained everything she had left. The man dropped beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe," he whispered, though his voice cracked with pain. She leaned into him, clutching his torn coat with her thin fingers. For the first time since he met her, she wasn't shaking from fear, she was shaking from relief. Above them, the great shadow of the new ship still lingered, its light scanned the forest, then dimmed slowly. The hunters began to retreat, their movements stiff, as if they no longer had the strength to continue. One by one, they vanished into the trees, leaving the man and the child alone in the ruin. The fight was over, at least for now. The man collapsed onto one knee, his body giving in. Blood soaked his shirt, pain burning through every muscle. The child let out a cry, her hands pressing against his wound. Her broken words spilled out desperately, though he could not understand them, but he knew what she meant. She was begging him not to leave. He managed a weak smile, lifting a hand to brush her tangled hair back. "You'll be all right," he whispered. His voice was soft, but his eyes burned with certainty. Even if his strength failed, hers had awakened. She was no longer just the frightened child who had stolen his food. She was something more. She was hope. The child's glowing eyes filled with tears. She pressed her forehead against his chest, whispering his broken name again and again. He held her close, feeling her small heartbeat against his ribs. Every breath was harder than the last, but he forced himself to stay awake, not for himself, for her. As dawn broke, the forest lit with pale light. The man struggled to his feet, pulling the child with him. Every step felt heavier, but he refused to fall. The two of them walked together, deeper into the wilderness. The hunters were gone for now, but he knew they would return. The fight was not over, it might never be over. Still, as he looked at her, small, scarred, but alive, he felt a strange calm. He had found something worth fighting for, not just survival, not just food or shelter, but something bigger, a reason. That night, they camped again under the stars. The child sat close to the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. She drew in the dirt as always, but this time, her hand moved differently. She drew him, standing tall with his weapon, and beside him, she drew herself. But unlike before, the figures were not afraid. They stood together, side by side, and above them, she drew a symbol, bright, radiant, like the sun, her way of saying hope. The man stared at the picture for a long time, then he placed his hand over hers, pressing her small palm against the dirt. Together, they smudged the lines, blending the two figures into one, a family, not by blood, but by choice. As the fire burned low, he whispered softly, "We'll keep moving." His words were simple, but his heart carried their weight. She nodded, her glowing eyes steady. For the first time, there was no fear in them, only trust. The stars stretched endlessly above. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, filled with monsters who hunted the weak. But somewhere in that endless dark, there was also light, and maybe, just maybe, their bond would be the spark that grew into something greater. A story not of fear, but of survival, of courage, of humanity. The man leaned back against the tree, exhaustion pulling at him. The child curled up beside him, her small hand resting over his. Together, they closed their eyes, two lost souls in a hostile world, but no longer alone. And as the night deepened, one truth became clear: the hunters could return, battles could rise again, but the human heart, when it chose to protect, was stronger than any weapon, and in that strength, hope would never die.